The Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Now you're welcome along. Sunday Papers coming at you. I'll run you through the headlines first of all. Lots of Manchester City on the back pages as the treble starts to become very, very possible. So the Sun here have treble in strife, and we have on the treble side of things Riyad Mahrez and Manchester City beating Sheffield United 3-0 yesterday. Mahrez fires hat-trick. The strife part is Ten Hag, who it seems went, in his words, really mad at his players after the defeat in Seville. So he gave them the hairdryer treatment, is the reporting there. Above that, Babs Keating has a column in The Sun, horrified by Tipperary's loss in the league semi-final. He thinks their performance at the end of the league will spill over into today's match. Sunday Mirror then, again we have Ten Hag here ahead of Brighton, Manchester United. Read the riot act. Eric Ten Hag admits he's been channeling his inner Fergie by giving his Manchester United players the hairdryer treatment. And above, it's Riyad Mahrez punching the air. Man City 3, Sheffield United 0. Magical Mahrez's final say. Picture from inside the Man City dressing room on the back page of the Mail on Sunday. Treble yell. It's Jack Grealish and Calvin Phillips and Rodri. Guardiola desperate to quell the hype, but history is very much in sight, which it is really. I mean, kind of starting to feel they're more likely than not to win the treble. And beneath that, England defeat was line in the sand moment, says Greg McWilliams. So Ireland beaten yesterday 48-0 at Musgrave Park, and Greg McWilliams says it was a line in the sand type moment for his team, who were certainly spirited. England, I don't think, were at their best, is the truth as well, though. We have the Sunday Times. Again, it's a photo of Riyad Mahrez punching the air. Trebles all round. Hat-trick for him, and City very much on for the treble. And then Sunday Independent, picture from South Africa yesterday. Munster, a crucial point for them, 22 points apiece against the Sharks at Kings Park in Durban. So that will mean Champions Cup Rugby at Thomond Park next year. And beneath that, Jurgen Klopp hopes Reds can be late to party again. So they are within 6 points of Newcastle, who do play Spurs today. That win yesterday against Nottingham Forest makes it 4 matches unbeaten, back-to-back wins. So we'll see. And then finally, Sunday World, Ten Hag, bright spark. Manchester United Brighton today. It's do or die against Seagulls, warns Ten Hag, as United flops need to deliver or face the exit. And bottom page of the back page of the Sunday World, Gerrard lined up for Nottingham Forest job, apparently, certainly linked with it. So they are your back pages. We have Cliona Foley, journalist and broadcaster, with us here in studio, and Kieran Cunningham, chief sports writer with the Irish Daily Star, who, by the way, has a podcast on Katie Taylor to be released very shortly in advance of the fight, 4-parter.
Yeah, it's called Untouchable, and it's I'm not looking forward to it. I'm excited about it. I think there's a lot to it. It's trying to tell the story in a different way, like looking at it in a wider social context of what the way women in Ireland were treated, the way Irish sports people, female sports people especially, were treated. Then bringing in other parts of the story, and unfortunately bringing in the shadow of the involvement of Daniel Kinahan in the sport, which very much there's connections towards this fight with Chantal Cameron that can't be ignored. But there's interviewed a lot of people, from Deirdre Nelson and Deirdre Gogarty, who were two broke serious ground in Irish boxing for women before Katie Taylor, Thomas Hauser, Donald McRae, Andy Lee, Eric Donovan, Barry McGuigan, Rosita Sweetman, who was a founder of the Irish Women's Movement, Emma Ryan, the Irish writer and camogie player. So there's quite happy with what we got together.
I think Deirdre Gogarty is coming home from America for that fight.
That's right, yeah. There's a function in Drogheda the night before.
They're looking to build a statue to her up there. They're looking to build a statue to Deirdre in Drogheda at the moment. They're trying to raise funds for it, yeah.
From memory, you were asking nasty questions at the press conference for the Katie Taylor fight. Irritating questions. You were an irritant.
Conor McGregor is going to be involved in some part as a sponsor through one of the products that he flogs. And I just said to Eddie Hearn, does he realise how divisive a figure McGregor is in Ireland? And, has he thought through that it might be counterproductive having him attached to this fight? And he gave some kind of a waffly answer, but didn't really address it. But I think those are valid questions, to be honest.
We'll press ahead with the paper review. So, might start, this is just one of those odd moments. Page 8 of the Sunday Times. I hadn't seen this photo before. This is like if you've had the pleasure of your wedding day and you look over in the corner and you see worlds colliding. You see your work colleague talking to your oldest childhood friend, talking to your college mate, and you're thinking, my God, the three of them in each other's circle, that is just very striking to me. So the photo in question, I hadn't seen this photo. Apparently, Paul Rowan obviously had last week and wrote a piece about it. It's taken in London's Mayfair. And we have, and it seems it was just a natural coming together, a meeting. We have Luis Figo and Robbie Keane out shopping together. And who do they bump into? Only John Delaney. And so there are smiles. I know. And smiles and a kind of a backslap, and they're all very happy to see each other. And so the photo has Robbie Keane smiling and looking in a different direction. And Luis Figo is saying something to John Delaney, and they're both smiling. So there you go, just one of these random moments. So it's not especially newsworthy, I would think, but Paul Rowan is writing about it nonetheless. And I suppose he's charting Robbie Keane, more than anybody. He said, last week pictures emerged showing Keane window shopping for watches with former Ballon d'Or winner Luis Figo. The chance arrival on the scene, however, of former FAI chief executive John Delaney glad handling in a familiar style as captured by a photographer is a reminder of Keane's last job in football as an assistant coach at the FAI. Keane himself seemed to be doing his best to move on after a brief exchange of greetings. He wasn't available for comment on Friday, but sources close to him said it was an entirely misleading and incorrect thing to say that there'd been a meeting and that instead they had simply passed each other in the street 3 weeks ago, as per the photos. 3 weeks ago, not last week. Delaney is today based in London, where he's trying to rebuild his career and reinvent himself as a sporting consultant, all the time while an investigation by the ODCE continues back in Dublin into his lengthy stewardship of the FAI. Paul Rowan goes on to write about Keane. Despite being Ireland's long-time captain and holding the record for both appearances and goals, 68 in 146 games, Keane is not as universally loved and admired as those spectacular figures suggest he should be. And Paul Rowan says the manoeuvrings involving him, John Delaney, Mick McCarthy and the present Irish manager Stephen Kenny contribute to the ambivalence. You'll remember, writes Paul Rowan, that with the FAI board's approval, Delaney granted Keane a 4-year contract as Ireland assistant in 2018 on a salary of around €250,000 a year. Keane's contract twice as long as McCarthy's. Official documents revealed in the Sunday Times that Keane was paid more than McCarthy's highly experienced first assistant Terry Connor, which raised a lot of eyebrows. And then, of course, as we know, when Kenny succeeded McCarthy in April 2020, one of his first acts was to omit Keane from his coaching staff. But the former Irish international remained on the FAI's payroll until his contract ran out last summer. And that was a situation much commented upon. And his omission from the Kenny coaching ticket angered Keane. And his wife, Claudine, called for the FAI to show him the, quote, respect, end quote, he deserves. And the piece as well notes that Keane was assistant at Middlesbrough under Jonathan Woodgate. That was largely a failure. Keane left in June 2020. Since then, it's been all quiet. He had a link to a job in Turkey, didn't happen. He was recently added to UEFA's 20-strong Council of Wise Men, which will advise the governing body of European football on a wide range of topics. He will also manage a celebrity-packed Rest of the World team in a charity match against England for UNICEF in June at Old Trafford. There is no doubt, though, that he still harbours an ambition to one day manage his country. So, in a sense, there's nothing in this piece, but
good picture, though.
It's a great picture, and the Sunday Times website is also, look at this picture. And,
sometimes the picture is all you need. I hadn't seen this picture before either. The thing about Keane, I mean, what's always struck me with Robbie Keane is how much the fans loved Robbie Keane. And still do, and just had just seemed to make that connection. I don't know, was his performances on the field or his performances off it. I think maybe with journalists sometimes there wasn't, certainly with some journalists, I think there wasn't the same affection for him. What struck me as well was I couldn't countenance that salary, that much of a salary being paid when so many employees, including people like Packy Bonner, clearly were badly done by the FAI at the time. And I just thought that I couldn't get that there was an inequality there that always struck me as a little bit wrong. And then Keane as well, if I remember, I think it's mentioned here as well, he was involved with club management, took an assistant job with Middlesbrough at the time as well. I couldn't understand that, So it wasn't a particularly, I just think some people wouldn't have seen the sense of all of that, and it was a lot of money at the time as well.
It was a huge amount of money, and Robbie Keane absolutely entitled to it. He made the agreement with the FAI. It was John Delaney and the FAI board's decision, and Robbie Keane was much criticised for a period then for continuing to accept the salary, even though he wasn't part of Stephen Kenny's backroom team. But again, he was absolutely entitled to do so legally, and you have to stress that. And I think certainly the Keane camp were at pains to stress that, even though suggestions were made by some people, well, given that he's not involved in the Kenny backroom team, should he move to sever the agreement? And if you remember, routinely every time anybody from the FAI hierarchy was asked about the situation whereby a large amount of money was going to somebody who effectively wasn't doing the job he was being paid to do, the FAI would routinely say, we're nearing an agreement, or we're going to talk about that, or that'll be sorted out soon. And of course it never was, and the contract just reached its natural conclusion. So to what extent that has damaged perception of Robbie Keane or not is difficult to say. As Cliona said, very popular with lots of fans. I always felt, and I don't even know what I'm basing it on, anecdotally, just a sense of, I don't know, you see polls about most beloved Irish sports people. You would think the record goal scorer on an international level in the most popular sport in the country should be always in the top 5 most beloved sporting figures. And I never saw his name feature there. I never got the sense.
Because I remember during lockdown, and you guys did that Mount Rushmore thing for each county. And I think you actually might have broken Dublin into North and South Dublin. But from what I remember...
We're big proponents of splitting Dublin.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But from what I remember, I'm not sure Robbie Keane made the cut. And when you maybe he did, but from memory, I don't think he did. And when you factor in, his record goal scorer and who he scored, big goals against, it would be surprising. But I do think there's been an ambivalence, is one way of putting it, towards his post-playing career. That I can't think of anybody in the history of Irish soccer that has had this kind of post-playing career, that is kind of a made man within UEFA. Even though he's very limited coaching experience, he's been put in among a group who UEFA will pick the brains of in terms of the future direction of the game.
Will they?
Will they? Who knows? Well, UEFA, I wouldn't rule anything out given some of the stuff UEFA and FIFA come up with. But also, you mentioned, he's managing this rest of the world team. But during the international break, I saw there was a game, a charity game between Liverpool and Celtic legends, and he actually played for both teams. He played a half for both. Like, he seems to do a lot of this kind of stuff floating around, and it's very, he has that kind of profile that he's going window shopping with Luis Figo. And I think, he was so associated with Damien Duff when they were growing up, coming through the ranks together. And Duff was actually, achieved a lot more in the game at a club level, the Premier League winner, etc. I was in Talca Park on Friday, and Damien Duff's on the sideline at Shelbourne, and he's immersed himself so much in the game here. And, I think Robbie Keane, as a coach and manager, if he does have ambitions, has to get over himself a bit. He has to think that, like Duff, I really value what Duff has done, and that he went to Celtic at underage, and Shamrock Rovers at underage, taken Shelbourne, who'd just been promoted, with a ground that was a very uncertain future, and that half of it was closed. And there's something admirable about that, that he went down somewhere he had to get his hands dirty. And I think, Robbie Keane seemed to be living a bit of a gilded life. And I think if he'd be serious about coaching and management, just grasp the nettle, take a tough job.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what he does for the next couple of years.
There's
for sure.
there's nothing stopping him from living a gilded life, and living a gilded life has got you would have thought has got several other people the senior job in Ireland before as well. Remember.
True.
So he's perfectly entitled to do it. I've never heard him say he wanted to be Ireland's senior manager, so I think that's an interesting line there, which there's nothing to back it up.
I think he did say it a few
Did he?
times.
Yeah.
And it's just implied if you want to be a manager, that's a job.
Well, if you were the assistant, you'd presume.
There was always a sense that part of the Delaney thinking
was grooming Keane for the future as a future manager.
In just the extent to which Keane was given a longer contract than Mick McCarthy was, that sense that, well, he's now going to be part of succession planning.
Yeah.
And then Stephen Kenny had other ideas. So it was all very messy. I mean, it was like a parting gift from that FAI board.
But it's interesting how this has been phrased. Paul Rowan says, Keane himself seemed to be doing his best to move on after a brief exchange of greetings. This is in terms of the picture. He wasn't available for comment on Friday, but sources close to him said it was entirely misleading and incorrect to say that there had been a meeting. So in other words, the sources were distancing him from...
Well, and I think to be very keen to put a distance, because I mean that agreement patently didn't work out. It cost the FAI a lot of money, and so any sense that here's a meeting of old pals who looked after each other is absolutely a perception I'm not surprised he wants to run away from.
Yeah, well, like probably the main thing in this article, it highlights once again that John Delaney is working as a sporting consultant in London, while this major investigation into stewardship of the FAI is going on, and you'd have to wonder why are people engaging with him? Like, do they not know how to use Google?
Well, I am always amazed by that, and I've seen it before with the appointment to some people in Ireland as well, and you do think, do they not look up Google? Do
they not care?
Well, John Delaney would argue he did a fine job in lots of aspects when it came to the FAI, and I'm sure he's
and well, if anybody wants to read champagne football, by Paul Rowan and Mark Tighe, was legal, nobody has sued over it, it's all in there.
We'll move on. In many ways it's the photo, and it's just an odd moment that happens in life in a city of 10 million people. Look who bump into each other in Mayfair. Out shopping for watches with Luis Figo. Why would you be at Tolka Park when you could be shopping for watches with Luis Figo?
They also prove the fact that
how many watches do you need? How many watches do you think Luis Figo and Robbie Keane have?
I think you need 7 anyway for every day of the week.
For each arm?
Yeah.
It also proves that the picture doesn't always tell the story as well. You always have to be careful with stills.
You do. We'll move on. So there's lots of GAA in the papers. There's interesting piece with Jack Conan, Jack Conan, putting some meat on the bone. Terrible phrase to use about a committed vegan, but he is expanding on an interview he gave to Second Captains a number of weeks ago, where he explained, I suppose, his poor form post Lions, where he was magnificent and was the starting number 8, and then just seemed to fade a touch from our screens. And he referenced in that initial interview that he just had a condition whereby he lost all his energy. Didn't go into too much detail. It sounded like long COVID to a lot of people. So he explains, I remember vividly being at training, I was running around thinking there's something wrong with me. There has to be something wrong with me. I felt like I'd aged 10 years in the space of 2 or 3 months. I said to our physio mid-session, I dropped out, turned to him and I said, there is something wrong with me. There has to be something wrong with me. I'd always prided myself on being fit from playing loads of different sports growing up. Now it just felt like someone had turned my power down massively. I was at 60% the whole time. It felt like every training session was 9 out of 10 toughness. Games were even worse. So again, this was around Christmas time, post Lions, where this all happened. And if it sounded like long COVID, he was considering that himself. It wasn't, writes Brendan Fanning in this piece. And it seems just a touch of luck is what sorted things out. So he had a neck injury, and that led to a brain scan, and an eagle-eyed radiologist spotted something which shouldn't have been there. So it was a cyst in his pituitary gland, which is common enough. He says, Jesus, it's a miracle we found this. So when they're scanning your neck, they scan all the way up to the base of your brain, and your pituitary gland sits deep between your eyes. I wouldn't be able to pick it out, I must confess, but it sits deep between your eyes. So somebody who was looking for a problem with the neck spotted something which shouldn't be there. That looks like a cyst on his pituitary gland. So that was the first person to pick it up. And Jack Conan says, whoever it was, I haven't gotten their name, and I really should, because I owe them a great debt. it was such a relief of finally knowing what it was. That was brilliant. When you don't know, you're pulling your hair out going, what's wrong with me? Why can't I perform? Why am I struggling so much? And they got to the bottom of it, and that seemed to sort things out. There was some medical care. They found a hormone imbalance, and he says the hardest thing in some ways was getting back mentally, that even when he was back playing again and they had the condition sorted out, he was almost constantly on the field asking himself, well, how am I feeling? Is my energy back? And he said he did a lot of work with Gary Keegan about resetting and focusing, and that name Gary Keegan there again.
Yeah, popping up again, exactly.
Yeah, so he said forgiving himself for everything which had happened previously, which was kind of an interesting line. I'm surprised to see he was beating himself up, but mentally he got back to focusing in the moment.
In some ways I was surprised. In some ways I'm surprised at this, Joe, in that it wasn't picked up earlier, in terms of, I would have thought professional athletes get bloods done, you know. Track and field stars, definitely. Track and field people get bloods done all the time. I was surprised at the bloods, that it wouldn't have popped up in his bloods. Female athletes particularly are always monitoring hormones, because women's bodies are so much more subject to hormones. So it's something that is bloods are always being done. And I was a bit surprised that, you know, they spotted this cyst in the pituitary and then did blood. So that surprised me a little, that it wasn't spotted easier. But it just shows you how quickly the engine can be depleted by something that is not visible. And he seemed to indicate, he does a piece in a couple of papers today, that once he found it, what it was, and they looked at addressing that, it was a mental problem. Then it was like, you know, that's where Gary Keegan, and nobody knows exactly what Gary Keegan does, as we know, but that's what he's good at. He's really good at working with them mentally.
It also reminds me that it just reminds you that often you don't know what you're watching, or you you don't know what somebody's going through when you're watching them. Like we could have been watching the Leinster Ireland game and saying, look, Conan has completely lost form. What's got him? He was overrated. He was never that good.
Is he arrogant post lines?
Yeah. And physically or mentally, you don't know what somebody is going through.
It's funny you say that often. Because we had one of the New York footballers on the show after they had beaten Leitrim, and the former Dublin player, Shane Carthy. Yes, and he was just, he kicked 5 points in the game off his left foot, but he was saying, oh yeah, no, I destroyed my quad a few days before the game, so I couldn't kick off my right foot. And I would presume every match that we watch in every sport, at least 20% of the players are operating with some major injury that they're just getting through the game with. And we never know.
Well, in rugby, anyway, because I remember Brian O'Driscoll saying this, and it was a few years ago, and I think it'd be even more the case now. He says, I think he said at least 80 or 90% of games rugby players play, they're carrying some injury.
Yeah, they'd have to be.
Every rugby player is carrying some knock in every game.
Yeah.
And with you even think about GA players now, with the tighter season as well, their bodies are just going to be under so much pressure, and they are going to be going into games injured, I'd say, or carrying knocks as well.
Yeah.
Because there just isn't time now. With the Hurling Championship starting this weekend, we see games are going to be coming thick and fast. There's only a 6-day break for some of them. Yeah, you're right. You don't know. But with professional sport, I think you make the assumption that, they're always perfect, when we know, so many reasons. And Conan's form is so good now again.
With female footballers and cruciates.
Yeah.
Like it's 8 times higher the rate, I think.
Yeah, and there's hormones are part of that as well. So, certain times in a cycle where you could be your tendons are actually more stretchy, and that leaves you more open to certain types of injuries at certain times of your period. So there's fascinating science that still has to be done in it
as well, because boots are designed for male feet.
Yeah, they're now looking at that.
I would never have thought of that. That can be
and
effective.
Women's hips just being in a different position. All kinds of sports science that still has to be done, if you like. And that's the big problem for female athletes, is that most sports science has traditionally been based on male bodies, but it's changing. And Athlone IT, I've said before, is an area in Ireland who are starting to do very specific female-led sports science, and even within Irish rugby, they're looking at stuff like that as well. But there's a presumption with professional athletes always that they wouldn't be on the field unless they were perfect, and that's so not the case.
Oh, no.
And so not the case. I always say that. I don't know whether you feel that sometimes, Kieran. Sometimes athletes may be unhealthy people.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no,
maybe some of the unhealthiest people we know, because of what they're trying to do with their bodies and what they're pushing through.
Yeah, and trying to make weight and not eating properly, and
Exercise
so many
being
things, yeah.
exercise very good for you. Professional sport not good for you. That's the
Exactly.
truth.
Yeah.
And funny actually, you talk about the lack of literature or studies. Cliona, Louise Galvin was on actually
Yeah.
a couple of months ago talking about playing for Kerry very soon after giving birth, and she's a physio.
She's a physio by
That's
trade,
right,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
And I remember her saying that when she asked the public health nurse about return to sport, there was a look of, well, I feel like I've never been asked that question before, almost, from the public health nurse, who I'm sure is brilliant at her job and everything. And Louise was saying, in terms of literature out there, as in this is how you make a comeback quickly from pregnancy, there's basically no studies out there.
Yes, there's nothing. Yeah.
By the way, just beside that Jack Conan piece, certainly in the Sunday Independent anyway, this is just a one-line point. Bernard Jackman's writing about the boy wonder,
Yeah.
Sam Prendergast, and he just opens by saying, last November, I asked Johnny Sexton to give me one player to follow over the next few years from the talent-laden Leinster Academy. He didn't take long before answering. Sam Prendergast.
But he makes a very good point about Prendergast. He's saying it's too early for Prendergast. People are looking for him, wondering, how quickly could he get into, the Ireland senior squad and get into. But he's saying part of one of his problems as well was that when he was starring for Newbridge in schools rugby, they got hit 2 years in a row with COVID. So even those big those big cup finals, they missed out on them. But I mean, he's obviously an incredible talent. I think he's talking about, there was Ruby Walsh asked him about it at a Punchestown launch, and he was saying, "Oh, Prendergast should be in the World Cup squad." And Ruby Walsh said, if you he won the Gold Cup at 19, but I don't think you can compare those things at all.
It's funny, I would tend to agree with you. And then Keith Wood was on Wednesday Night Rugby this week, a man who I would say it is not his form to get aboard any hype train.
Yeah.
Everything is just settle down.
Yeah.
And he's usually right. And he blew me away because he sat down and he said, I'd be thinking seriously about Prendergast for the World Cup.
Really? Yeah.
Very
Interesting.
seriously. He's like, he's the best. He's the one. The composure is unlike any of the other pretenders to Sexton.
But if you look at him physically, though, and that would be my worry, would be how is he, just at the age and the physicality that he has now, I would just be worried that he'd get broken up very quickly by the big monsters.
They were saying against South Africa last week, I didn't see the game yesterday, the 62-point defeat, but they were saying last week that so his ranginess can be a touch deceptive because he's 6'2" or 3", he's very tall.
Yeah.
But his defensive work was brilliant.
He's afraid of nothing. He's absolutely afraid of nothing.
Maybe.
Sorry, and just to clarify, when I'm talking about the Ruby Walsh point, I'm not saying that I don't think he's. I'm not looking at his age. I'm looking at the potential to be injured at his age compared to the potential to be injured even in horse racing. I just think that this is a collision sport where somebody could do him serious damage if he's not ready physically for the very, very elite level of World Cup.
No, it's a fair point. Seeing as we're on rugby, just to finish it briefly, it ties in with protests. Eamon Sweeney's writing about protests, and there was an attempted protest yesterday at Ireland 0, England 48.
I was there.
Were you? Okay.
I was, yeah.
Well, I don't know if you got one of these flyers. Before the game started, security staff were seen collecting and confiscating. This is Sinead Kassan on page 17 of the Sunday Independent. Confiscating flyers with the words, "I give a F," which were being handed out in the main stand. This, of course, relates to an article in the Daily Telegraph from 2 weeks ago, which alleged that a prominent figure in Irish rugby said, "Who gives an F" about women's rugby during a dinner last month. So an IRFU spokesperson said after the game that they were aware of the protest, and while they mightn't agree with it, everyone has the right to protest. Their issue with the flyers was the foul and abusive language, children at the game being handed out, and also there is an anti-littering policy apparently at these matches. And also I think they were saying there is an obligation from broadcasters that language like that being held up and caught on camera isn't ideal. Hence, they confiscated the flyers.
Yeah. I didn't see any being confiscated. I went looking for one and I couldn't get one because they were all gone. So that must have been why they were gone, because I saw some people had them.
I do see their point on that if there's kids at a game.
Yeah, and there were a lot of kids at that game yesterday as well. There does tend to be quite a high degree of it. I don't know. I think people are entitled to do what they want. You're bringing more attention to it nearly by confiscating stuff and then making a story out of it. But look, that's there is some element to that. I suppose it's fair enough to say that.
Look, if I was at a game and someone's handing out leaflet saying "I give an F" and I was there with kids, I'd be saying, "Would you stop?"
Yeah.
Let's have a protest. Geez, the IRFU deserve it. They really do, because the situation is dire. But I just don't know if that was the best slogan. But listen, everyone is entitled to do it, go about their business whatever way they want. The situation is absolutely dire. Ireland have scored 2 tries in the whole championship, one of them being a penalty try. So if they want to avoid the wooden spoon, they're going to have to score 5 tries against Scotland away from home next week. 4 tries, they'll have to get 5 points. There's just no chance of that happening. I don't even think they'll beat Scotland. Scotland were very good yesterday against Italy, a famous home win for them against Italy. So what that will mean, short version, is that Ireland will most likely finish bottom of the Six Nations at first wooden spoons and so forth. That will mean they will be consigned to the W15s competition Tier 3. This is a new competition starting this year, in effect to give more rugby to female players. It'll be very important for development. So at the start of the championship, people were saying, God, Tier 2 wouldn't be great. People weren't even saying Tier 3 was likely. And now I would think it's very likely Ireland will be in Tier 3. So that will mean not just 1 year, but 2 years of opposition like Jamaica and Kazakhstan and just the minnows of international rugby. So I don't know. I'm not sure we've reached rock bottom in this situation, actually. I think
one of the questions to ask is how could we have avoided reaching rock bottom, right? Yeah. That is a legitimate question, is to say how could anything else have happened here. I do think, looking at the lineouts yesterday, which were a disaster, I think
second week in a row they were.
Aoife McDermott and Cliona Maloney are people who I think could still be contributing, and I don't understand why they're not in there.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't understand why Hannah O'Connor is not off the bench. She should be the first person off the bench. Every time she comes in, she helps, and I don't understand why she's not a starting player. But there is a big gap in skill level, extraordinary. I was just saying to Kieran outside, I was in Croke Park a few weeks ago, and there was a girls' blitz, a kiddies, a primary school blitz, and I was just waiting to do a job, and I was watching the kids, and these little girls just blew me away with their skill levels. I mean, soloing, jinking, dummying, both right, left, could kick with both feet, loads of them on the pitch. They were in for a day and they were just having the best fun, but the skill level I just was really blown away about. But I was looking at minis on the pitch yesterday down in Musgrave Park, and the skill level was nothing like that, and it won't be, and that's okay. And people just have to understand that, because those little girls that I'm watching on the pitch in Croke Park are the third generation who are getting top class coaching and investment and money and resources. And while there's a whole load of stuff that still has to go into county level, and there's a good piece by Nadine Regan today in the Sunday Indo, just the skill level of these kids is fantastic. It's not there yet with women's rugby or girls rugby for us, and our numbers are small. And there were 2 occasions yesterday where if we had Bevian Parsons or Enya Breen on the pitch, I do believe we could have scored tries, but they're away with the sevens. And I don't believe we have the population to do both.
No, well, I think there's close to 200,000 registered female adult GAA players in the country. We have about 8,000 registered
I don't think that's
players.
adult. Yeah, I don't think that's adult. I think that's maybe total. Total, I think. Yeah, it's not adult.
Adult.
No, it's not adult. I think that's in total. But
that's worse again.
No. But you're talking about this layer. As I said, you've got 3 generations now who've been really well coached and have, there's just an amount of work that has been done by the LGFA at coaching level and at club level. It's just not there in rugby, and you just have to understand that that's where we are. Would it be the worst thing in the world? Yes, if you have to go down to Division 3 for that amount of time. What I really wonder is, how are the sevens where we put all our resources, how did they lose their manager in recent weeks, which was buried by the RFU very well far down in a press release? I don't understand how that happened, because that's where their money is going. They're saying a lot of money. I know it's Olympic money that's gone in there, but I don't think we have the players at the moment to sustain those 7s and 15s, and I think it showed yesterday. They kept them scoreless for half an hour in the second half, which on the basis of what we've seen from England this year, that was good.
It was borderline second string England in places.
Yeah, and they lost Marley Packer as well, but we'd lost Linda Dujang as well. So but that was on both sides. But I feel sorry for the players. I think the RFU have a lot to answer for, but I think we have to accept where we are as well.
Oh yeah.
This is something Cliona said to me outside, and I know it is probably an awkward one for you, Joe, because you're on Virgin covering it.
No, ask away.
Yeah, but is the amount of coverage they're getting, can that be problematic? Because they're trying to, are they getting too much coverage given the level they're at And the focus now on when terrible results or one of terrible results, and a lot of those women are basically learning their trade.
Yeah.
When you look at the amount of caps they've had, that it can be counterproductive. Like we talked often, we need to give more coverage to women's sports for a lot of very valid reasons. But when all this is going on, you wonder if there's just too much spotlight on them.
Oh, I'd say it's adding to their sense of woe, and
social media obviously as well. Do you know what I mean?
I thought Nicola Friday, even in the anthem yesterday, I thought she looked very strained.
Yeah,
and she was emotional a couple of weeks ago giving an interview. So I think she has the weight of the world on her shoulders, and there's no doubt that being on national terrestrial television, being hammered, can't feel good. And previous generations, okay, their good days were almost behind closed doors at Ashburn.
Yeah, they were.
Their bad days also were almost behind closed doors. So listen, would we all like to be humiliated in private or in public? I'll take private.
Yeah.
So I think it's no fun.
Yeah. So I saw somebody saying they should, we can't stop them going on social media, but really, the best thing in the world would be for them to go off social media, because there is an element on social media where, in women's team sport, people just love to niggle you and throw absolute crap at you. Well,
it's funny, I've had it's not an eye opener, because I know it goes on, but it's been interesting the last couple of weeks. I'm now through Virgin, and it was the same last year. You're tagged in more tweets around women's sport, and therefore you start to see the conversations and the healthy misogyny, the joyous responses from I suppose grim men in their underwear, or not. Maybe they're perfectly front-facing successful men, but on Twitter they like to talk this way. There's like a glee. Well,
let's put it this way: if all the people who were bitching about the Irish women's rugby team were in Musgrave Park yesterday, it would have been full. You know what I mean? So, if you haven't gone to a women's game and you don't understand the standard and you don't understand the problems that they've had, why add to their sorrow? Yeah,
but it's across the board in the sport.
Easy dopamine hit on Twitter.
you work as a live broadcaster on both radio and TV, and at times you will have a slip of the tongue. Everybody does. Everybody mangles a sentence at different times.
When? Give me one example. How dare you?
In about 5 minutes, I'm going to pick you up on this. Give me a few weeks off. But you wouldn't be picked. Like the amount of times I've seen Joanne Cantwell or Alex Scott or Jackie Hurley or whoever, like they're hammered if they say something wrong. Like they just get a sentence wrong and they express something wrong that a male broadcaster is never hammered on. Like they're definitely treated differently that way. And like I know that I often mangle sentences on live radio or TV.
You do?
Like everybody. I know. Thanks for confirming that. But it's fun. It's not funny. It's very telling how women are set up to a higher standard than that. I don't understand it.
Yeah. I can't speak to that. I haven't.
Yeah, but no, there was an example with Alex Scott a few months ago. I'd need to dig it out, but it went viral. Okay. Like she got a.
But I think football, and particularly English football, particularly is particularly misogynistic. There just seems to be a really streak there that jumps on every time they can. It jumps on. I think it should change. And I think it's starting to change maybe a little bit because women have been successful. Yeah. But this is the problem: do women have to be ultra successful for you to stop having a go at them all the time?
Yeah. I don't doubt that point at all. I would say I just think football is toxic to everybody.
Maybe.
Honestly, it's grim. It's grim. It really is the worst.
And social media is toxic to everybody as well. It doesn't help.
Because I was actually thinking, there's so many podcasts now in football, but the one that you would probably guarantee to make money on was if you called it Proper Football Men Podcast.
Well, you should put that to the test.
Straight away, you would get loads of subscribers, even if they hadn't heard a word of it, but just the title alone would get them on board. You can never have enough proper football men, Joe. You don't make the grade.
Well, John Hartson said that to me on air once. Honestly, we were chatting and Kev Kilban was on and he was midpoint to one of my questions and he said, look, I'm a football man. Kev, you're a football man. And just hang. It's like, all right, John. Back page of the Sunday Independent. So it ties in with protests. Eamon Sweeney noting the protests at Aintree and the protests at the snooker, and he says activism without pragmatism can become narcissism, although he does, I don't think he's saying that, to be fair, about these protests. He does note Barry Hearn's comments of like, stick him in jail for a month or nonsense.
Yeah, well,
Was
I have
Barry
to,
saying that? A
It was
month in jail?
classic. It was a
but
classic.
did you watch the Grand National coverage? I thought
Month in prison, I think it was. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the pundits in the Grand National coverage, their reaction to the protests was a bit feeble as well. I thought, and saying like these people have never been in the stables, and do they want to bring the horses back up for them and look after them?
My favourite line was AP McCoy saying they're just attention seekers.
That's the point.
David Walsh has a piece about the Grand National today on the back of in Sunday Times, which is interesting enough because he is looking at. He's agreeing with some of the elements of particularly, I think a lot of people, even people who ride horses, think maybe less horses in it now. You've brought down the fences, you made them safer, maybe less horses would just, would help. But what he's saying is he does note that thing about the coverage, and he was saying that when they did the review of it, they started from fence 2 and went onwards from there. Because fence 1 was
there's absolutely on the ITV coverage, and at Cheltenham as well, there is such a sensitivity to the criticism and the anti-horse lobby. They are very nervous, and even when the Gold Cup happened and a horse went down, they were just at pains to say over and over again afterwards, the horse is okay, it's okay. So I think they are very aware of. But
as Eamon Sweeney says, Aintree doesn't even rank in the top 5 most dangerous English racecourses according to Animal Age. That dubious honour goes to the likes of Southwell, 12 deaths in 2022, Newcastle, Sedgefield and Lingfield are, so he's just saying, and then he of course is making a comparison with all of our hypocrisy as well in terms of.
I have to say, I agree with this. Now, Mick McCarthy, my producer on the weekday shows, has said, will you stop going on about buying your food at the shop? So I'm just going to let Eamon Sweeney is going to do my work for me here, because in some senses there is a gross hypocrisy the way we talk about horse racing. So Eamon Sweeney says, last year we saw 178 deaths at British and 84 deaths at Irish race courses. In 2021, Horse Racing Ireland revealed 870 horses have been killed at Irish race courses across the previous decade. Looked at in isolation, these figures can give the impression of carnage, yet the fatality rate is roughly 0.2%. Those 2 horses in 1,000 are the trade-off made for the continuation of a sport which, according to Minister for Agriculture, has an annual economic impact of €1.8 billion and provides direct and indirect employment to 29,000 people. So Eamon Sweeney says that might seem a cold-hearted calculation. However, in 2021, 1.8 million cattle, 3.7 million pigs and almost 3 million sheep were slaughtered in Ireland in a single year. This year, planning permission is expected to be granted for 36 new factory farms, which will contain 12 million chickens and 55,000 pigs. They will live briefer and grimmer lives than the racehorses, with a 99.8% survival rate. The majority of those involved in the Aintree action are probably vegans. That's the protest he's talking about. But most of us turn a blind eye to factory farming and wholesale animal slaughter simply because we like eating meat. We don't, strictly speaking, have to. It's just something people enjoy, like watching racing. And I agree with that. I think, look, there are lots of aspects of horse racing which people find distasteful, absolutely. And I think the second lives of retired horses, or those horses which don't cut the mustard, that's an area where racing needs to up its game massively, because there are grim existences there, and there is neglect, and there are bad actors. And Paul Kimmage had a piece recently about mistreatment, which would just make you want to cry when you read about the lives of some of those horses. But if we're that serious about animal welfare, it all pales in comparison to the numbers being slaughtered, because we like a burger of a Saturday evening.
There was also an argument to be made, I ride horses, and so I know a little bit about horses.
Right.
But there was an argument, a fair argument I saw being made last week as well, is that the delay at the start also didn't help some of those horses, because they were so wound up, and made life more difficult for them.
Sure.
So they weren't in a calm frame of mind starting that race. But I go with David Walsh. I think going with David Walsh, I don't think there should be that many horses in it. I think they've got to get away now. They've tried everything else. Definitely, I would think less numbers.
Okay.
You shouldn't see people barging into each other and crossing each other, and there were so many unseated riders this year. It was shocking. And they're all brilliant jockeys, and brilliant horses. So you just shouldn't have that. So I think it was 11 were listed as unseated.
I think Eamon finishes the column very well.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of outrage at the protesters, particularly the snooker protests. A lot of people seem to get their backs up over something that was relatively harmless, I thought. But, he points out that, just quoting him, elite sport consistently finds itself on the side of the bad guys. A World Cup is played in stadiums built by cruelly exploited workers, autocratic regimes by top soccer clubs, and host major events to burnish their image. The IOC, led by erstwhile Vladimir Putin fan Thomas Bach, hopes to sneak Russian athletes into next year's games. NBA stars turn a blind eye to China's behaviour in Jiangxing. Sport allows itself to be used by some of the worst people in the world. A bit of disruption would be no harm at all. Orange Eddie might be annoying, but sport's biggest enemies are within. And I think there's a lot for that. Like, there's a lot of things that people should be outraged about in the world of sport.
And he didn't even mention the WTA going back into China,
yeah.
Which is an interesting one, which has got very little coverage.
Yeah, but these protests are in the halfpenny place compared to what people should really be outraged by, I think.
I know. But look, I was enjoying that snooker and now it's over. Let's move on to GAA. So plenty of coverage. Hurling Championship this weekend up and running. We have two pieces in agreement with each other. Pat Spillane and Mark O'Shea, two Kerry greats. So just to give you a flavour. Curious for your thoughts on this. So Pat Spillane, he's referring here to the brilliant Monaghan Tyrone game. Don't be fooled by the hype. Football is a bore fest.
If we could put this into context in relation to the things yesterday, this would be the equivalent of Pat standing in Croke Park with a little sign saying it's still shite.
Yeah. Still puking. I laugh out loud there, but I am not entirely in disagreement with him.
I'm not either.
I like the language.
Everyone
got carried away when 902 scored that amazing goal last week.
Yeah.
But this
like
is
the
his point.
second half of that game, it was maybe 1994 down v Derry was a great game, but other than that second half was as good as I've ever seen in an Ulster football game.
Great,
but it was an outlier, as is pointed out in Pat's play. The other two games in Ulster were really one-sided, and Armagh were miles better than Cavan yesterday again. There could be a few more one-sided games in Ulster to come. And part of the thing, I think, I would go to a fair few club games in both Donegal and Dublin, and so many players now, like if you're in your early 20s, say that infamous Donegal-Dublin 2011 semi-final was 12 years ago. So if you're 21, you are 9. So there's a lot of people who've grown up just playing this possession game and fist passing and over and back, and it's all about possession and playing the percentages. They actually don't know anything else.
Yeah.
So it's very, very hard to change that mindset. Like, even if you go in as a coach and say you're from a different generation, like Colm O'Rourke saying, I want to go more direct, I want to go more traditional, and that suits me football. All the players he's inherited and has taken in from their clubs have grown up from the age of 8, 9, playing a completely different way, and it's very, very hard to change that.
So Spillane's piece, to give you a flavour of it, he starts off by saying, even though I spent years studying English at secondary school, I still have no interest in or love of poetry. I doubt if I'm alone. I imagine 99% of the Irish population haven't a clue whether Evan Boland is a type of biscuit or an Irish poet. Yet during Joe Biden's presidential visit, nearly every speech included the obligatory poetry quote. As an aside, I also agree with that. Jesus, Biden. Yeah. I mean, every bloody time you open your mouth.
Lay off the Heaney.
Well, especially because in virtually every time it's done, that the person doesn't actually read poetry. It's been thrown in there by a speechwriter or who's Googled Irish poetry quotes.
Well, he'd often
say... No, in fairness, I think Biden is obsessed with Heaney.
Well, no, he is,
very often fair. You're right.
Yeah. But is he obsessed? Yeah, even Bold, I wouldn't be sure he's familiar with. No.
Sorry, is it even?
Yeah.
Evan Boland. Sorry.
Boland,
yeah. Well, I just thought a few times when he was saying, as the great Irish poet, and then he'd strain at the auto cue. I just thought there was a degree of that at times, Heaney aside, for sure. Anyway.
He goes on to quote Patrick Kavanagh. Anyway.
He does, yeah. It seemed like there were extra marks for quoting an Irish poet. The more obscure, the better. This poetry love-in peaked when ex-President Mary Robinson recited an entire Evan Boland poem during her warm-up address to 27,000 people in Ballina. Methinks she lost the audience. But in the spirit of the moment, I decided to go with the flow this morning. And so he quotes Patrick Kavanagh, who did play football as well. And he said, we never finished a game if towards the end we were abating. We always found an excuse to rise a row and get the field invaded.
But I have to say, that a point of information, that's not from a poem.
No.
That's from an essay called Gut Your Man,
Oh,
which
good man.
everybody should read. It's one of the funniest pieces I've ever read in Gaelic football.
Well, that's 1930s advice. If you're getting a hammer, just start a row and get the thing abandoned. Anyway, here we go. So he says, after the match last week, we heard the phrases, and we did, in fairness, everyone was saying, well, what's wrong with Gaelic football? Who said Gaelic football was boring and predictable? The Ulster Championship never disappoints. He goes on to say, modern day football is boring and predictable. And he says, the Ulster Championship never disappoints line. He mentions Derry beating Fermanagh by 12 points and a 9-point win for Armagh over Antrim. So let's have a reality check. Of course, we witnessed a damn good match in Omagh. Provided us with a glimmer of hope, but one swallow never made a summer. I won't get carried away yet. So his point ties in with Mark O'Shea's argument. He says Monaghan threw off the shackles, they released the handbrake, they played without fear. Mark O'Shea starts off by writing about his brother Tomas's Kerry under-20 side, who scraped past Clare last Monday evening, and he started off imagining Tomas's dressing room chat afterwards, which would be tetchy enough. But he did say that, based on all the matches he watched this spring, fear has trumped ambition in Gaelic football. Possession has been king. Risk aversion has been the tactic of choice. And as a result, the game, as a spectacle, nosedived. He says it's one thing watching senior footballers doing it. It's another when you're watching an underage team playing to such a cautious script. And Kerry, he says, were no different, playing with an extra defender, even with the wind in the first half, reluctant to kick the ball in case they risked it being turned over. They struggled all evening. And
I don't know about you, but it was always one of the reasons I loved covering schools football. I loved covering under 21s and minors, because there wasn't that. They were just free to play. They weren't being restrained by managers. They were letting them do their thing. Okay, there's tactics in it, but not this constant fear of losing the ball that just everybody is obsessed with now. So it's interesting that he's seeing it at under 20 level now.
It's true, and he makes the argument. So it's, to draw a link, Spillane talks about Monaghan throwing off the handbrake and the shackles. And Mark O'Shea's making the point that he thinks one of the reasons the game last week was good is that he says there are no consequences for losing. Indeed, there may be benefits. You have a defeat which, grounds the group, and then you get 4 or 5 weeks training, and that will arguably leave you in a better place than if you went on a winning streak and took an Ulster title. So he said it may lead us to a rather perverse place where the standard of the spectacle will get better because it's the fear of losing isn't there. But that is only because the importance of the game is diminished. So the spectacle will get better because the importance of the game is diminished. I'm not sure whether to be happy or sad about that. It's like getting a sugar rush, but at the same time feeling guilty because it's not good for you in the long term. He says there's no longer even the pretense that somehow a loss in the provincials is damaging for these top sides. You lose or you win, you end up in the same place in a month's time. As a result, the football may look prettier, but at the end of the day, you're left asking the ultimate damning question about the championship football. Does it really matter? So there we are. That's an interesting thought.
It is interesting, but it matters to some teams. Say Monaghan aren't going to win All Ireland. Tyrone could win All Ireland. Boys. Yeah. So to Monaghan winning an Ulster would be a huge deal. Even if they won a couple in the last decade, but generally they haven't won. Before that you'd go back to the 80s. It would still mean you saw what it meant to Derry last year. It would mean a lot to Roscommon because generally it's a carve up between Mayo and Galway. We saw what it meant to Tipperary when they won in Munster, what it meant to Cavan a few years ago. And all those counties I mentioned there are not going to win the All-Ireland. So to them, the provincials really matter. It doesn't matter really. To Mayo, the goal has to be the All-Ireland, of course.
Yeah.
So losing to Roscommon was a blow, but ultimately they'll probably go into the All-Ireland series seated the same level as Roscommon.
Yeah.
And also, just one quick one, Cliona. I think also this season is a learning curve for everybody because it's a new system and we don't really know what it's going to be like.
No.
Like at the end of it, we could be saying this doesn't work at all. The All Ireland series could be a disaster. It could be a lot of one-sided games.
You could potentially have a load of one-sided games because you could lose. I think you can lose 3 games and still go through. Like the way it's set up means you could actually have a few more dead rubbers even in that. Everybody thinks, this is going to be the big saviour. I don't think it is. I thought there's 2 things. One was Darren Hughes was gone last week. So once Darren Hughes was gone, Monaghan changed how they played. So like it wasn't like, oh, we'll deliberately all go to out attack. They actually had to do it for
and very clever tactic by Vinnie Corey bringing McCarthy back back to wing back, and he basically ran the game as a deep line playmaker from there. Like, and it was a move that nobody really saw coming, but. In the ultimate scheme, the bigger scheme of things, it's a game that completely be forgotten at the end of the year. But it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, it was great.
At the time, and that's what sport is. It's not always about the destination.
No, it was a great Sunday for all their fans and for all the players. It was living life.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody loved it. It didn't matter where you were from; they loved it. But there is an interesting piece because in the Sunday World. A page behind Spillane's pieces, it's interesting because Roy Curtis has a piece and he's saying, and it struck me watching Dublin during the league particularly, like, Con O'Callaghan, don't waste him bringing him back to defend. I'm sorry, one of the most lethal forwards in the country, and a lot of the time this year they played him like that, and he's making the argument that he is Dublin's Haaland, and playing him back and using him defensively is just, it's just a terrible waste of talent, and that's the fear you have with these systems,
But now everybody does it. Like last night I saw it where Rian O'Neill would be Armaz Con O'Callaghan.
Yeah, brilliant.
And he made a diving save on the line.
Oh, incredible stop. Actually, an incredible stop.
Say brilliant. And he should be their full forward and left in there. But this is what they all do now.
I don't mind that as much, I have to say, because I think the players are so fit they can transition quickly and get up the pitch. What bothers me, I suppose.
But in those really pedestrian matches where nobody's doing anything, that's where I just can't bear
Cork and Clare was a good example the other week, where it was just possession for possession's sake. And I genuinely think if you were to hit pause and ask all the players who were just mindlessly going side to side, the Cork players, what are you working towards here? What are you trying to engineer here? I honestly think they would have said, I don't know, I was just hand passing to the guy next to me. I'm not giving the ball away, because that gives us some sense of sophistication.
Well, if you listen to even Paddy Andrews on your own football pod this week with Tommy Rooney, James O'Donoghue saying, in that instance, I would have punched the ball last weekend. I mean, seriously, what a really brilliant lethal striker for Kerry when he was there. And to hear him saying that he would have punched the ball, I'm like, oh no. But then Paddy goes, when we were in trouble with Dublin, the rule was take 2 minutes out of the ball and find a shot. Yeah. And that's what football is now.
But with Dublin, I never minded it because I knew there was a methodology and a purpose to it. Whereas I honestly think quite a few of the county teams are mimicking that, but not thinking it through. There's no sense of adventure, there's no risk. And I did think watching Cork Clare, well, you see, you've got to have training 51 weeks a year for this. This is your life, and you're only going to be that age once. And there just has to be more adventure about your play. But I just think this mimicry has taken over a little bit. Not in all cases. And by the way, when football gets to the latter stages, it is 100% better than it's ever been.
Yeah, I think when you get the brilliant players moving the ball fast,
better than it's ever been. But I think the bad teams are just mimicking without purpose.
Well, it's this thing of don't lose the ball.
Don't lose the ball.
Yeah, don't lose the ball.
I'll go off on a bit of a tangent here, but this really struck me as well, because Donegal are playing down today. Right?
Sorry, they were. You want to see a team playing without method in the league? So give us other examples. Donegal, numero uno.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My uncle there, by the way, against Dublin, it was just back and forth.
Yeah. But that's what I mean. I never remember. Excuse me. 10 of the players who played Donegal's last championship game last year aren't available for this one today, which is amazing turnaround, and for various reasons, between retirement, injury, they've opted out, whatever. And then there's the player heave against Paddy Carr. There's everything that's going on with Academy Carr Lacey, that I don't remember expectations ever being lower. But it just struck me this weird thing in the GA about being professional. So one of the things that people try to be professional at training camps. So Donegal, in county board meetings where they were discussing all this going to the academy and the player heave, etc., they also approved the players going, the squad going to Carton House for a couple of nights, which was last week, at a cost of 35 grand.
Oh,
I remember seeing that.
Okay, and everybody in Donegal knows Donegal are going to do nothing this year. They've already been relegated, and they're not going to be good championships. It's just not going to happen. So why are you doing that money? Especially when last October, they opened their Centre of Excellence in Convoy that ultimately will cost 7 million. that when you were spending this amount on your own, and also at that county board meeting, they talked about how difficult they're finding it on the fundraising front this year because of all the bad publicity around what has happened with Paddy Carr and the academy. But there's no joined up thinking there. Like, this is a year like if that came up to me and I was county board chairman, and you said, we have spent millions on a centre of excellence. Why are we paying for a training camp? And especially this is a season that we just have to hunker down and get through it and try and rebuild for next year. But I think this is the thing that so many go, we have to be seen to be professional. So being seen to be professional is funneling the ball around all day and never taking a shot. Yeah. It's going to Carton House when you're no
What
helper.
is professional? Yeah, what is professional, you see? That's
like, it's burning up money. Like, as you say, watching that Cork-Clare game, they've trained so hard, and that's what they're doing. Because, like, Ryan O'Toole did something that most coaches would have been tearing their hair out because he did it. Because 19 times out of 20, it went past two Tyrone players. 19 times out of 20 would hit one of their legs.
It was totally the wrong thing to do. It was. Like, we can't just be outcome based. It was the wrong thing to do, but good luck to him.
Yeah. Well, we were all delighted by it as well, excited by it.
And
they it's funny, hurling is under a little bit of pressure as well at the moment. Yeah,
I was going to say. So, for instance,
do you like your hurling, Joe?
Michael Foley on page 17 of the Sunday Times. It's kind of interesting piece. There is, by the way, across the board, but we won't get too into it because it will date horribly if you're listening to this on a Monday. There are lots of previews of the Championship. We have Waterford, Limerick today, and Clare Tipperary. Suffice to say, everybody thinks Limerick will win the All-Ireland, and at a canter, that's the gist. But Michael Foley's piece, goals are drying up, so where is hurling headed? And it ties in with that point about possession as well. He said the real problem for hurling now goes to the very soul of the game itself. The game remains too cold at the moment. It's too clinical. What do the GAA want hurling to be? What should it look and feel like? In a global environment where control, possession and percentage plays have emerged as the defining characteristics of modern sport, how does a gloriously random sport like hurling cope? That is such an interesting way of framing hurling. It is in the midst of this global environment where all sports are about control, possession, percentage plays, and so where does a sport like hurling fit into that? The belief, continues Michael Foley, embedded over generations was that hurling was never built to be played in that way. Now there's a generation that can't imagine any other form of the game. It's even more demoralising when all the conditions are there for hurling to thrive. Players have never been fitter or as skillful, scoring records tumbling every year, and Limerick are outstanding champions. But hurling itself cannot self-regulate against elements of play attacking its very identity. He says there was some hope in the stats last year that the game was about to enjoy a spike in goal scoring. The figures from the 21 Championship showed an average of 3.5 goals per game, the highest in nearly a decade. Instead, though, teams retreated into their shells. In 34 Championship games last year, 97 goals were scored, which is an average of 2.8 goals per game. And in the league, we saw a continuation of that, 92 goals in 34 matches. Although I have to say, I did wonder if in the league generally we see fewer goals with the weather. However, as goals are being outgrown by long distance points, a dreary sort of order has dammed up a wonderful source of chaos. And he finishes off by wondering if, various committees have examined increasing the points value of a goal, or adjusting the design of the sliotar. The science of making the ball heavier won't shorten the distance. The idea of increasing the rim size to reduce the aerodynamic quality and make it harder to ping, stick passes and puck outs has never really stuck. But they have to try. There should be no limit to thinking. To reduce, for instance, long-range scoring and encourage more contests. Why not make any free inside a team's half an indirect strike?
Yeah.
There isn't a player who will wish to adjust the ball or to see any free removed as a scoring opportunity, but those are the hard types of choices that need to be made.
And it's like taking the mark out of, the forward mark in Gaelic football. Again, I think that forward mark is depriving us of,
chaos.
More exciting action that we want to see. The chaos, exactly. And he makes the point, he was saying in the world of heritage sports, and he equates hurling to baseball in America. He says, but American baseball, they haven't been afraid to change the rules of baseball to try to change how the game was going. And I think, look, I've been thinking about this for the last 2 years. I mean, Limerick are amazing. They're brilliant. They're fantastic. But I miss fielding. I hate all the rucks. I miss goals, and I miss fielding. And that brilliant Kilkenny team of Cody's, my God, their fielding was sensational. You know, that was part of the joy of watching them, was how brilliant they were at fielding.
Tommy Welch is on the show later, watching him go up and catch a ball.
Oh, I mean, for a guy who wasn't huge, but just everything about the way they played. And these Limerick hurlers are sensational hurlers. Their skill levels are phenomenal. But he's right in that. Enda McAvoy put it brilliantly in the Examiner in a piece yesterday, where he said, you know, when the game has evolved to the point where guys can light a cigar when they're out playing half back before they send in, you know, an 80-metre free, there's something slightly gone. You know, the balance has shifted. Yeah. And I did think that the thing that's been in my mind was the ball. Can we change the ball to make it heavier so that you can't score so easily from long distances anymore? Because that's what physically they're able to do with their skill and their power. And it's interesting because I didn't know that the sign said the making it wouldn't shorten the distance. No. But I do think that there is something to be said for down the road. Look, maybe this Limerick team are an aberration and other people can't do it. But even I noticed even during the league, the ability of players to score long range points. And in the league, it's nearly more obvious because they're not being challenged at the same level as well. There isn't the same physicality in the game. Yeah. But it is a really interesting point. It's like where is the game evolving, and where is the delight of the goals? We're not seeing as many goals.
Geniuses like Paul Kinnerk who sit there and go against conventional wisdom, and they figure out new ways to do things. I mean, changing the rims would change how aerodynamic the balls are, and that would make it harder. Is are hurling people unhappy with?
I think a lot of them are. Yeah, I think a lot of them are, because the appeal was, a large part of the appeal was the chaos, because hurling was so different to other team sports, and that it wasn't all about possession. You know, it was about content. Like, you got it, and you know, it was a contest that really energised people. Like the roar, somebody would just do a mad clearance up the field, and there would be a battle for it inside, and people loved that kind of thing. And also, remember, not that long ago, the reaction to long range scores. Like, they used to get a huge cheer because they were unusual.
Not anymore.
Every time people see them, or people expect them.
There is something wrong when you see players on their bad side knocking over a pint from 60 metres, and the commentators saying, that's a score.
You nearly don't appreciate the skill of it. Do you know what I mean? And the other thing, what I always loved about hurling is that you couldn't play negatively. That you couldn't.
It's uncontrollable.
You couldn't bring everybody back to defend. That's what I love about hurling. Yeah. But essentially, that is what started to happen. You play one sweeper, you play two sweepers, and then because of the strength and the speed of the players and the skill, we can score. We can score very quickly on the counter. So it has changed. And do hurling people feel this way about it? I think there are elements of hurling people do. And Michael Dignan even mentions it as well today in his column in the Mail on Sunday. And he's also making that thing. He's talking about his 25 years since Offaly won that most dramatic of all Ireland's, and the chaos of that year he just talks about, and everything was so crazy that year. But he's saying there is a little bit of wildness lost, a little bit of excitement lost, and even in the way the game is being played now, we're losing that thrill, we're losing a bit of the drama.
Because do you think those sensibilities might have changed now, and so we're harking back to that bit of wildness? But if we were to be reserved that for whatever reason, do you think any of us would sit there and think, this is actually brainless stuff? They're just whacking it away thoughtlessly.
Well, no, because it wasn't brainless. There were some teams that played that way. But if and they used to always say, "Oh, Cody doesn't play tactics." Of course, he played tactics, but it was their ability to dominate everybody in the air. And there is that thing in hurling about beating your man or your woman in the air. That is a mark of brilliance, and I think that's been lost.
Yeah, I think possibly you might look at it with a more sceptical eye, just because we've been so conditioned. It's like if you watch soccer from the 80s or the 90s or the 70s.
Unwatchable.
It often looks slow and unwatchable, or often is slow and unwatchable, because you're conditioned by what you're watching week on week now. But I always think that the quote from Anthony Daly is probably the best ever to come out of hurling, when he said, sure, look at hurling, 1,000 mad things and someone comes out on top. But the problem is you don't get the mad things as much anymore.
No, the Paul Kinnerks of the world rightly say, well, we can control a lot more here than we thought.
And it's why our jaws drop when Joe Canning or Limerick, they do the mad flick or whatever. Like, that drives kids into a sport. I really believe that. Like, that's what the kids will be out.
TikTok moment.
If they see it on TV, that's what we were out in the garden practicing, trying that stuff. Like, it does. There is an element of that. So, like, managers have a completely different view than fans do. But I do think it's interesting that it's starting to be talked about in hurling now, and I think people are looking at it.
Well, look, it's. I think we're at an interesting point maybe in sport where all of these sports are however many 100 years old, and sports science has reached unprecedented levels. And even in golf, they've now reached a point where they have said, okay, we now do need to just change the ball because the athletes are better, the equipment's better, and otherwise golf courses will be redundant. So maybe in a whole host of sports we're reaching those levels.
And also there's something to be addressed, because if you look at the conditioning now, eventually people will think, should it be 15 players? Should it be 11? Should it be 13? Those things come in because...
Well, that conversation is happening in rugby, and they keep tweaking the rules, and they tweak the rules, and suddenly the attack gets on top. By the way, just to mention, Joe Brolly's writing about this as well, as is Michael Dignan. Game can't afford to lose good referees. Michael Dignan's, his larger piece is about 98, but he just has a smaller point. He says, once again, the issue of referees making headlines. Fergal Horgan leaving the game, big talking point, though the stats don't back up his case that Munster officials don't get enough big games. He did 3 of the last 6 All-Irelands. But he says, then there was the talk of the referee's fitness test and how it's making things trickier. David Coldrick, who Joe Brolly's writing about as well, and he's of a similar mind to Michael Dignan. David Coldrick is gone from the football panel. The bleep test is supposedly 17.4. For an inter-county player, that's handy. For others, it's a high enough bar. Should a referee be cut or ruled out if he doesn't hit it? If he hits 17.2, does that not mean he can control a game? It's like telling a dressing room of players, if anyone drinks, they're off the panel, and then the best player goes out. I think it's a very awkward precedent. You have to be more flexible. It's hard enough to get quality referees. In Joe Brolly's piece, he suggests that David Coldrick had
an injury,
a muscle strain. And so now he doesn't get a chance to recover and prove himself again, which does seem very inflexible.
I do think if you've got somebody of Coldrick's experience, and I really like him as a referee. I think he's a really fair, just kind of solid referee. He's always been one of the top referees. If it was an injury, surely you don't want to lose a really top class referee. Why not let him go back and do the test in a few weeks?
Yeah, and the other thing is, because of the way the season has changed, like, even if he's got an injury or he needs to get up his fitness for whatever reasons, or any referee does, surely he could come into the frame after the provincial championships, for the All-Ireland Series and the Tailteann Cup. Why has he been gone for the whole summer?
If a referee pulls a hamstring today in a match, surely they're not just booted off for the rest of the season. They get a chance to recover. He should get the same chance. I would presume so,
yeah. I would presume.
That's very strange.
Brolly's column is great today. If anybody wants to read it, it just made me laugh out loud. It's very funny.
It's just story after story, and I was like,
well, it's Peter Whitnell
as well.
Is that
true? Can I read this out on the radio?
It's Peter Whitnell, who's an absolute legend, and it's well worth a read. It's just really good fun.
We're pretty much out of time. Is there any last piece you want to direct people towards? We mightn't quite have time to discuss it. Nadine Doherty with Vicky Wall, interesting. Vicky Wall, she catches her at the Mead Star in the car on the way to training, where like 90% of the female inter-county players in this country, she's getting no mileage, and she's very keen for integration of the 3 associations and for male players to speak out, and the point is made in the piece, the GA has more than enough resources to serve all, but we're not serving all at the moment. So I think that's a cause which is to the fore of most minds. Yeah, that's
her point. She's saying, all this talk of integration and money keeps coming up, and she's saying the GA have lots of money, so why not? Why are things happening at such a slow progress?
I think it's worth mentioning Jonathan Northcroft's piece on Arsenal, because I don't think in any way Arsenal have bottled it. Like, Arsenal could beat City on Wednesday, lose to City on Wednesday, win the rest of their games, and they'd end up with 90 points, which would match their highest ever tally, and they still wouldn't win the league, because I think it's sinking now with everybody. The City have changed the landscape so dramatically that any little slip is punished. And I think Arsenal, the youngest team in the Premier League, Arteta would be the youngest manager to win it if he won it. Like, they've done wonderfully well, but as he points out, Jonathan Northcroft mentions a conversation he had with Jimmy Carragher after Liverpool slipped up in 2014. He said, you're building this next year. He says, it's never that simple. And he's pointing out that Liverpool, United, Chelsea are likely to be stronger next season. Newcastle will spend a lot of money. City will probably have Jude Bellingham, be even stronger.
Yeah.
They mightn't even make top 4 next year, which is pretty grim for them.
I'd agree with that. Could be just one of those great chances that you don't get again.
And there's just one last piece from me. Sean McGoldrick has a piece with Daniel Whiffen, the Northern Ireland swimmer, Irish swimmer. He's from the north, but he's people just watch out for this guy. And what is really interesting about him, he's a twin. Two of them have gone to Loughborough, but he is swimming sensational times. He took 15 seconds. He's a long distance swimmer, 1500, like it's 30 lengths. But he has knocked chunks. He's knocked 15 seconds off the Irish record. He's gone over to England. He like everyone always said, this kid had unbelievable talent, and the other brother is really good as well. But what's really interesting about him is he says he's no problem saying, I'm going to break a world record, and that's rare enough. And in team sport now, where players are coached not to say anything in case anybody would get a little bit excited, this guy I think is going to be one that you're going to be watching next year in a big way.
30 lengths of 50 metres.
Imagine. And he's in Loughborough, it's where he is, it's the English training centre as well, and there seems to be an indication that because everybody around him is just slogging through this, it's really lifted his game and he's willing to slog through it as well. But he's always been regarded as a real serious endurance talent. I
started swimming in a 50 metre pool last year for the first time.
It's a long way.
It never ends. It was such an eye-opener.
I swam in Clontarf.
Yeah. It's unbelievable. I was like, I had to stop halfway and let people
Which
through.
is what normally we do, 25 metre pools. Exactly.
Yeah, it really opened my eyes. Anyway, that's one of the least insightful things I've ever said, so we'll move on. Kieran Cunningham, Chief Sports Writer of the Irish Daily Star, thank you. Cliona Foley, as ever, thank you very much.
Thanks,
that
guys.
was the paper review for this Sunday. We're back next week.